I want to ask you to think with me for a moment and think about this question. Who is it? What person or what people has God used in your life to help grow your faith in Him? What people have been influential in your life in terms of your faith, in terms of your relationship with God? Who has God used, whether it's through example, whether it is through conversation, whether it is through a continuing relationship, that God has used them to help you grow in your trust and in your dependence and in your faith in God? Do you have somebody in mind? Did somebody come to mind? Somebody who has been important in your life? For me, I'll give you 3 examples this morning as you think about your examples. One of the men that God has used in my life is a man named Bill Luttrell. Bill was, when I was in college at Abilene Christian, Bill was a minister at the Hillcrest Church of Christ, and he worked with the university students. And I got to know Bill a little bit that way just as he was the teacher. But then one day Bill called me, and he said, "Can we go have a Coke?" And I said, "Sure." And we went and we had a Coke, and Bill said, "Hey, would you be my intern in the college ministry?" And I agreed to do that, and that grew from there to later I became the college minister. And it was important to me in terms of ministry, the relationship that I had with Bill, but even more important than that was that every week and sometimes every day I was in Bill's office and I was having conversations with Bill and I was learning about what it was to be a godly man and to be a godly minister. And so God used Bill Luttrell in a way in my life to help grow my faith. God used another man named Ted Paddock to help grow my faith. Ted was one of my elders, and Ted and I just clicked. And Ted invited me to be a part of a singing group that he was in, and so we got to start spending time together. And from there, about 8 years ago, Ted and I decided every Tuesday we would go eat breakfast. And at those breakfasts, we talked about church, but much more importantly than that, we talked about life, we talked about work, we talked about priorities. We talked about getting along with our wives. We talked about raising our children. And in a really important way, God has used Ted Paddock to help grow my faith. I'll give you one more example. God has used a man named Markham Herron to help grow my faith. Markham and I were in a small group together for several years, and we got to know each other better during those group times. And Markham became a man in my life who held me accountable. And Markham became a man who God used when I struggled with sin, when I struggled with my faith. He was one of those guys who was always looking for opportunities, situations that we could put ourselves in to grow our faith. And he would invite others in to do that. And he's one of those guys who was never settled in his relationship with God. And so God used Markham in a powerful way to grow my faith. And because of those 3 men and others through the decades that God has used, but because of those 3 men, I can stand here today and say I am a different husband, and I am a different father, and I am a different minister, and I am a different man of God because of the way that God has used those people to grow my faith. I hope that you have some folks in your life that you can think about and that you can point to, and you can say, yes, God has used them to grow my faith. And when I look back at those relationships, I would say, oh, that God was in that. That was a providential relationship. It was providential that Bill asked me to go get a Coke. It was providential that Ted asked me to sing in a group with him. It was providential that Markham and I were in a small group together. It was providential that God put those folks in my life. Now, I have a choice. God never forces it on us. I have a choice, but it was providential that God put them in my life. And when I look back, it's because I chose to lean into those relationships, that I was in a place that God could use them to grow my faith in Him. And whenever you hear about people talk about their faith in God, whenever you hear people talk about their growing faith, you will hear them talk about relationships. You will hear them talk about people. Whenever someone talks about their relationship with God, you never hear them talk about a story where they were in isolation and all on their own. They had an experience and they grew in their relationship with God. You hear them talk about people. You hear them talk about other relationships. You hear them say things like this. And then I met this girl, and I started dating her, and I started going to church with her. I didn't go for God. I went with her. But while I was there, I started listening. Started listening to the preacher. I began to believe. I'm now a Christian, and we're raising our children in the Lord. You hear people say things like, and then this guy started working with me. He was a lot of fun. We hit it off. He always talked about church and his faith, but he never made it uncomfortable. And then my girlfriend broke up with me, and I was at a pretty low place, and he started talking to me, and he talked to me about his faith, and now I'm a Christian. Or you hear folks say, and then this family moved in next door, and they invited us to go to church. Or you hear someone say, we'd been going to church for a while, but only on Sunday morning. And then someone invited me to their group. And for the first time, I really began to build relationships. And we started eating together, and we started spending time together, and our kids got along. And for the first time, I was studying my Bible, and I really believe God has grown my relationship because of those folks. Every situation I just described has real names and real faces to it. That is how God grows our faith. And I want you to remember this phrase, because we're going to say it over and over and over. God uses human relationships to grow our relationship with Him. God uses human relationships to grow our relationship with Him. Now, the opposite is also true. The principle works both ways. Has there been somebody in your past that you regret having a relationship with them? Has there been somebody in your past who has undermined your faith, who has, because of your relationship with them, you moved further away from the Lord? It works both ways, and we're going to see these scriptures again. It works both ways, but it's often true that relationships are pivotal in our life, one way or the other. Relationships are vitally important. They have the potential to undermine our faith, and they have the potential to grow our faith. So, what do we do with this truth? What do we do with this principle that providential relationships are a way that grows our faith? We can't force them. We said that last week. We kind of made a little joke. We can't go up to somebody and say, I really think God's going to use you in a big way in my life. Would you be my best friend? They usually run away when we do that. We can't force it, but what I want to talk about this morning is how can we leverage it? How can we put ourselves in a place that we take advantage of? How can we put ourselves in a place that we lean into these relationships that God brings to our life? You may have grown up hearing and believing that faith was really about what you did on Sunday morning. Faith was about whether you attended Sunday morning. And if you did, you were counted among the faithful. It's a phrase we would use. They are faithful because they attend. You were even more faithful if you come for Bible class. And you're even more faithful if you come Sunday night. And you are really faithful if you come Wednesday night. And I'm not making fun of any of those things because we're going to talk about how God uses practical teaching to grow our faith next week. But it's more than that. It's more than just attending. It's more than just receiving information. Faith is more than about just information. And so have you ever asked yourself this question, how can I leverage relationships to help build my faith? How can I put myself in situations and in environments where God can use providential relationships? And if you have not asked yourself that question, I'm going to say to you this morning, you're missing out on a great opportunity to have a growing, deepening faith in God. Let's go to those verses that we saw and read just a moment ago. One from the Old Testament, one from the New Testament. Proverbs 13 and 20. The wise man says, walk with the wise and become wise. But a companion of fools suffers harm. We all know the truth of that proverb. the people that you surround yourself have an enormous impact on you and on your life. They have the potential for good and evil in your life. The one from the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 15 and 33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. How many of you had a mama or a daddy who quoted that verse to you? Bad company corrupts good morals. Bad company corrupts good character. Kids, teenagers, you may have had your parent quote that verse to you. And they did because they know from their own life, not just from Scripture, but from their own life, that it is true. And whether you're a Christian or not, you know that it is true. Relationships have a huge impact on our lives, and it works for good and it works for ill. Relationships can make us wise. Relationships can harm us. Relationships can enhance our character. Relationships can corrupt our character. Relationships can draw us closer to God. Relationships can push us further away from God. And so, that being true, what are we going to do about it? That being true, us acknowledging that and saying, you know, that's right. I've seen that in other people's lives. I've seen that in my life. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to lean in to those relationships and participate and engage in opportunities, environments where providential relationships can happen and God can grow our faith? God can use those human relationships to grow His relationship with us. And so, recognizing that principle, and we said this last week, but as leadership here at this church, we are going to create some opportunities for you to put yourself in those environments where providential relationships are more likely to happen. And we're going to call those groups journey groups. That's our name for these small groups that are going to meet together during this campaign where providential relationships can and are more likely to begin to happen. Because the probability of a relationship growing in your life happens better when you're in a circle than when you're in a row, right? It happens better when we can look each other in the eye, not just look at the back of our head. And so we want to create this opportunity for you. The question this morning is, will you intentionally put yourself in a place where God can grow your faith? Will you choose to put yourself in a place where providential relationships can happen? You know, last week we started and ended with this question: what would your life be like if you had a huge faith in God? How would your life be different if you had a great big faith in God? If you knew that God cares about you, that God knows your name, that you depend on Him, that you put your trust in Him, how would your life be different and better if you had that kind of faith? And I'm going to tell you this morning, if that's your desire, if you would like to see that if become a reality, one of the ways that God will do that is through relationships. And one of the things that you can do to make that happen is put yourself in a place where those relationships can grow, because God uses what? Human relationships to grow our relationship with Him. Now, I am well aware that some of you are very content to be here on Sunday morning, and you're satisfied with that level of involvement and participation right now. And I want to tell you, I'm glad you're here, because you got to start somewhere. And when you start somewhere, you grow. And so I am glad that you're here, and I want you to keep coming and being here and honoring God with your worship. But I'm going to be brazen enough this morning to ask you to grow, to ask you to go deeper than that, to ask you that for just 6 weeks you would put yourself in a place where you could begin to make some more relationships, where you could look some folks face to face instead of just the back of their head, and that you would put yourself in a place where God would begin to use providential relationships to grow your faith. I'm going to ask you to participate in a journey group. A group of around 12 other people who are going to meet for 6 weeks during our 40-day campaign. When the campaign's over, you get to decide if you want to keep meeting again and continue being in that group. But I'm asking you to allow God to deepen your relationships with other people, with other Christians. And I'm telling you that it may be those very relationships that God will use to grow your faith. And if you've got kids, you need your kids to be in a place where they build those relationships too. If you've got kids, you need them to be in a journey group. You need your kids in a circle where other adults are speaking into their life. Other adults who have the same values and the same goals for your kid that you have. Other adults who will reinforce and say the very same things you're saying at home, but they're not listening to them. You want your kids to be in a place where other adults are speaking into their life. And I promise you, the day will come when you will be glad that you did. You don't want to wait till it's too late. You don't want to wait till the crisis happens and you look around and you don't have anyone else there speaking into their life. You need to put yourself and your kids in this environment where God will use other people to grow your faith and to grow their faith. And it's not just about a church program. It's about intentionally choosing to lean into one of the ways that God repeatedly and consistently grows the faith of His people. Personal experience. Just within the last few weeks, Paul and I met with a group that we had been a part of in the years past and that had been a part of our life and a part of our growing faith. And in that group, I had the opportunity to confess that I was really dealing with some hopelessness at that time. And I won't get into why, but it has to do, I get myself in a state when I think about politics and the state of the world and all that kind of stuff. And I had just really gotten myself in a place where I was hopeless. I was just in a bad place. And I confessed that to that group, and they prayed for me. And 2 days later, one of the ladies in that group texted me, and she said, in my reading of God's Word this morning, I read this verse, and I thought of you. And she sent me that verse and sent me a little prayer, and I'm here to tell you this morning, it was exactly what I needed. It was from God. It was words that blessed me and brought some hope into my life. And that's because I was in a place and had built a relationship where I could confess that, people would pray for me, and 2 days later, they're still thinking about me. That's the way that God uses people to grow your faith. Another personal example, I'm a chaplain for several businesses here in town, and I go and try to be a presence for Christ in the lives of the people in these businesses. And Friday, sadly, one of the ways that I had to do that was go to court with a young man as his marriage was being dissolved, as his divorce was being finalized. And as I was talking to him, he told me that in this crisis, as so often happens, he had returned to the Lord. And he was going back to church. And he said he and his wife, they had gone to church. They had taken their kids, but they had never got involved. They had never built any relationships. But he said, this time I'm doing it differently. And this time I'm not just going, but I'm now going and I'm meeting with a group that's at that church. And he said, I'm getting to know folks there I never even knew went there. And he began to talk about that. And folks, that's the way it happens. That is the way it happens because God uses human relationships to grow our relationship with Him. But there's another side to this coin as well. Because it may be that you already have a pretty strong and vibrant faith. You already have a growing relationship with God. You want it to be bigger, but you've already got a growing relationship. And it may be that God is going to use you as you lean into these groups and these relationships. It may be that God's going to put you there to be the providential relationship. You may be the one that someone else in this room needs to get to know and that God will use. And so, as we come to a close this morning, I want to ask you, if you believe that this principle is true, what are you going to do about it? if you believe that God uses human relationships to grow your faith, what is the next step that you're going to take? And if you would take out your bulletin, we have your next step card attached to the bulletin. And we always give you the opportunity to take a next step toward a relationship with God by becoming a Christian. We'll be thrilled to help you do that this morning. We always give you the opportunity to take a next step to become a part of this congregation, and we'll be glad to talk with you more about that this morning. But very specifically, as you put a next step in place based on this truth that God uses human relationships to grow your relationship with Him, I'm going to ask you this morning if you would decide that you are going to participate in a journey group. Would you decide today that you are going to sign yourself and your family and your kids up to be a part of a journey group for 6 weeks during this 40-day campaign? You're going to have a chance to sign up for those groups in a couple of weeks. But I'm asking you this morning to decide now that you're going to do it. And make a commitment between yourself and God that you will lean in to those relationships. And you can do that on your next step card. I'm also going to ask you to think about another step to take. Because there are lots of folks who are not in this room this morning who need a relationship with somebody that God can use to grow His relationship with them. And so I want you to think about somebody that you will invite to be here at Edgemere during the 40-day campaign. Somebody that you will invite to go to a journey group with you. And I want you to write their name down. When God gives you that name, when He puts them on your heart, don't think about that. You go ahead and write that down. And you make plans to invite them and let them have the opportunity to be in an environment where God would use other people to grow their faith. And wouldn't it be really, really cool if one day they stand up and say, you know, it all started when so-and-so invited me to Edgemere. God grew my faith when so-and-so invited me to be a part of their group. I'm a Christian today, and wouldn't it be cool because it's because of you and because of God using you in that relationship. So I want you to commit today to being a part of one of these groups. I want you to commit to inviting someone to be here during those 6 weeks. And then one other very important next step that I want to talk to you about this morning is I want you to think about being a host for one of our journey groups. I want you to think about opening up your home and being a host for other people in this congregation to come and meet. And let me first of all tell you what a host is not, so you can get some ideas out of your mind. A host is not a Bible scholar. You do not have to be a Bible scholar to host one of these groups. The teaching is going to be done via video, and all you'll have to do is turn on the DVD player and ask a few questions that we'll give you when that teaching is done. So you do not have to be a Bible scholar. You also don't have to be a born leader. The video is going to give you coaching tips, and the discussion guide is going to give you step-by-step instructions to follow. You also don't have to have a showcase for a home. You don't have to have the perfect, immaculate home. Don't let that be one of the excuses that the devil will use, and he will use it. And he'll whisper into you, you know what? I'm embarrassed by my house. I really don't want anybody to come to my house. So-and-so's house is nicer to mine. Just don't let the devil go there with you. You do not have to have a showcase. If you have a hospitable spirit and you can pick up the stuff in the living room and hide it in the bedroom, you can be a host. You don't have to be a salesman. You don't have to go out there and knock on every door in town and make the pitch and get folks to be in your group. We're going to publicize these lists. Folks in this congregation are going to sign up to be in a group. We'll give you some invitation cards that you can tell your friends and coworkers and family and neighbors about the group meeting in your home. And you don't have to be a certain age. We need folks from every age to open up their home and host a journey group. Now, I've told you what it's not, so you can get some of those preconceived ideas out of your mind. I want to tell you what it is. Here's what a host is. H, they have a heart for people and a heart for God. O, they're willing to open their home. S, they're willing to serve some refreshments. And T, they can turn on the DVD. And folks, I mean it. It's that simple, because here is a truth. God doesn't call the equipped. God equips the called. You look through Scripture. God doesn't always call the equipped. God equips, but He always equips the called. And I'm calling you this morning to listen and be very, very willing. Take very seriously this idea that I can be a host. And we'll equip you when you do that. We're going to have some orientation meeting next Sunday night. Next Sunday night, the 20th, on Sunday night, we're going to have an orientation meeting. We're going to spend a day and this week and next Sunday urging you to heed the call and become a host group, and then we will equip you. And here is my step of faith. I've prayed about this, and I'm asking for 15 people to step forward and be a host. I'm asking 15 of you to open up your home for a journey group. With that many groups, there will be room for every single person in this congregation for 6 weeks to be in a journey group and put themselves in a place where God will use providential relationships to grow their faith. With 15 groups, there will be enough room for this whole congregation and the friends and neighbors and family that you invite. And with 15 groups, there will be enough to answer the prayer I have been praying, that this church will be a magnet for this neighborhood, and people will literally be drawn to us and to God. And so I need 15 of you to make the commitment for 6 weeks to be a host and have a journey group in your home. If you would make that commitment on your next step card today, if you would bring that to myself or Scott Finley, we're going to be out at the table in the foyer, and we'll be ready to talk to you and begin to make that happen. I'm going to talk a whole lot more about this tonight. I hope you'll come back tonight at 5 o'clock as we continue to talk about this. But as we finish today, would you pray with me, and then we're going to sing. Father, I want to thank you for the relationships that you have used in my life. I've mentioned 3 this morning, but the list is long, God, as I look back and I see how providentially, at every phase of my life, you brought people into my life who blessed me. And I thank you for that. And Father, as the good folks in this room think back through their life, I give you thanks for the people that you providentially brought into their life, who've blessed them and who've helped to grow their faith in you. And Father, I pray this morning that you would speak to folks in this room who are going to put themselves in a place to allow providential relationships to happen. And I pray that there are people in this congregation today who will decide to take the next step, to put themselves in a place that you'll use human relationships to grow your relationship with them. And I pray, Lord, this morning that you would raise up hosts in this congregation. And I pray that you would raise up men and women who will fill these groups, and that you would use these journey groups in a very, very powerful, incredible way to grow our faith. And I do continue to pray that you would make this church a magnet for this neighborhood, and people would be drawn here because we are lifting you up. And Jesus, you tell us that when you're lifted up, all men will be drawn. Make that happen here, Lord. I pray it in Jesus' name.